Hello and welcome to episode 95 of This Week in BJJ. Today is November 24th and I am wearing a Nino Schembri hoodie, one of my favorite guys in Jiu Jitsu. Nino gave me this a couple years ago when I visited his academy. Great guy. If you're in the Manhattan Beach area, definitely check out Nino. We also have some instructionals from him on Budo Videos, so just a quick shout out to my friend Nino Schembri. So on today's show, we have Jason Manley, who is a Jiu Jitsu black belt, a very accomplished MMA fighter and coach. We had a lot of fun talking, and he shows some cool positions from half guard in the technique portion. But before that, let's talk about EBI 5. EBI 5 is the Eddie Bravo Invitational. It takes place on December 13th in downtown LA. This time it's the lightweights chance. Defending champion is Denny Prokopos. He's coming back to defend his title, and he has some stiff competition. He has Ronnie Yaya, Eddie Cummings, Nathan Orchard, Dan Covell, and 13 other guys that are going to be all vying for the first place. If you've watched any of the other EBIs, you know it is a super fun and exciting tournament to watch. Again, it'll be hosted on BudoVideos.com. For more information, go to BudoVideos.com/EBI5. If you want to know a little bit about what you're in for, go back and watch EBI 4. It's totally free on YouTube right now, and you'll see. You're almost guaranteed a submission in every single match. So, super fun event. I can't wait for December 13th, and we hope you join us there as well. Okay, just a couple new products to talk about before we get to the interview, so let's go to new products. Two new DVD sets I want to talk about today. First one is from Bernardo Faria, one of the most dominant guys in Jiu-Jitsu today. He is the current double gold medalist. He won his weight class and the open weight division. And he's here with 4 DVDs all on escapes. And if you're like me, when you started Jiu-Jitsu, maybe you're a white belt or blue belt now, you're getting beat up a lot. So you need to know your escapes, and who better to learn them from than Bernardo Faria. He shows you a ton of ways to get out of bad situations and bad submissions. You're going to learn a lot in this set. There's only a limited number available, and it's going for a great price of $77 for the complete 4 DVD set. Check that out on BudoVideos.com. And the other one is a pre-sale. This one's going to be out in another probably 2 weeks. This is the ADCC 2015 complete 7 DVD set. Every single match from ADCC World Championships that was held in Sao Paulo, Brazil this year is going to be on this DVD set. So lots of excitement from so many of the top grapplers in the world. So be sure to check that one out as well. And as we get closer to Black Friday, now is a good time to be a subscriber to the Budo Videos newsletter, or to follow me or Budo Dave on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. Be sure you are following us so you know about the big Black Friday sales coming up this coming weekend. Okay, now let's go to viewers' mail. Today's question comes to us from Lewis. He says, what do you recommend for ringworm? And I think he's talking about preventing ringworm, because there's some things I could tell you to how to get ringworm, but I don't think you want to hear it. So how to get rid of ringworm. If you've been training long enough, you're probably going to be exposed to these nasty skin irritations like ringworm or staph infections. I've dealt with both of them over my years, and it's going to happen, especially if you go to different academies, have different people coming into your gym. No matter how clean you keep it, you might encounter it. So whenever you see something weird on your skin, be sure to keep a close eye on it. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not, so be sure to, you might want to, get your doctor's advice. But I've tried a number of things, including going to the doctor, getting not only over-the-counter stuff, but prescription strength medications. And believe it or not, none of those worked for me. I had one that it just wouldn't go away. It was a spot on my hand, and it was just so annoying. And the one thing that worked for me was the Defense Soap Salve. And this is a product that is over the counter. You don't need a prescription for it. We sell it right here on BudoVideos.com. It's in a little vial like this, and it's sealed so you can't really see it. But it's like a petroleum jelly. And you just put that on, and it has a nice tea tree smell to it. It doesn't irritate you or anything. And whenever I see anything weird going on, any kind of skin irritation, I just rub a little bit of that on, put a Band-Aid over it, and go to sleep. And it gets rid of it fast. At least that's been my experience. So you might want to check that out if you have any skin irritations. In fact, I'd recommend keeping one in your medicine cabinet so you're good to go whenever you have an issue. The Defense Soap Salve. It's only about $10, $10 or $12 available on BudoVideos.com. Okay, now it's time for an interview and techniques by Jason Manley. Jason is a guy that lives right here near us in Orange County. He coaches, teaches classes at a nearby gym. His focus is more on no-gi and MMA in particular, but he's also a Jiu Jitsu black belt under Cesar Gracie. And we had a lot of fun talking, and he showed some really cool techniques from the inverted half guard position as well. So here we go, interview with Jason Manley. Jason, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you guys
I'll
for having me.
shake you with my left hand.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, it's funny. We've hung out a few times before, but even though we both live in Orange County, we've never hung out in Orange County.
never have.
I've seen you in an airport. I think it was Brazil. We trained together in England before. We were at a party in LA, so it's cool to be on our home turf.
On our home turf, absolutely.
But now your hand is looking a little bit bigger than the last time I saw you.
Yeah, I fought a few weeks ago and fractured my middle and index knuckle. I was punching the guy, but I won in the first round. It was worth it.
Awesome. Yeah, I know you've had a very successful MMA career. You're a great jiu-jitsu guy, great coach as well. We'll get into a little bit more of that lately, but since we're talking about your hand, in the first UFCs there was no gloves. And there's a lot of guys with broken hands in those matches. And then people thought that it was for the safety of the other guy that people were wearing gloves, but actually it was to protect their own knuckles.
Absolutely.
But you still had a hand injury. Are the gloves not protective enough?
Yeah, man, not to throw anybody under the bus, but when I was getting my hands wrapped, I kind of looked at it. It was a lady wrapping my hands. And she wrapped them good, like the technique, like, just, not to be sexist, but when she was rapping it, I was kind of like, oh, does this lady know what she's doing? And her technique was like perfect, but they were a little bit thin. And I remember thinking like, oh man, it looks a little bit thin, but okay, I can grip a little bit better and I'm not gonna throw too many punches, but sure enough, man, yeah, I should have probably had it a little bit thicker.
Have you ever thought about going old school Boss Root and Pancrase style with the open palms?
I want to punch somebody. So no. I probably should have though in that fight. I definitely should have. Or more elbows, less punches.
So we'll talk a little bit more about your MMA career in a bit. But I was doing a little reading up about you. I didn't know you got your blue belt from Royce. And Royce is he's a legend in the sport. He's what got me interested in jiu-jitsu and many other people. He's an absolute legend. But I have heard secondhand or third hand that he gives out blue belts at seminars to people that he might not know too well. And I'm wondering if that was your experience.
Well, I hear about all types of things, like people basically giving away belts. That wasn't my experience then. I got my blue belt from Royce in '99. I actually was doing most of my training with a guy named Jenkins. He was like really my head coach and taught me pretty much everything. Royce gave me my blue belt after I did Gracie Nationals, and I won my weight class in the open weight, submitted it. I think I had like 15 matches and submitted everybody with the same choke, actually. Submitted everybody and won both divisions, and he gave me my blue belt on the spot. So
he wasn't really your coach. He just saw your amazing performance and said, you know what, you're not a white belt anymore.
Yeah, well, I was training. We were under Gracie Academy. I was training at Gracie Training Association with Jerry, and we'd go up to Gracie Academy, and when I did the tournament, yeah, he was the guy to promote me. But yeah, most of the stuff I learned, even a lot of the techniques and fundamentals I use today were from Jerry Jenkins. Okay,
yeah. But still, it had to feel pretty good to be promoted by such a legend.
Absolutely, yeah, I do, absolutely. After that, though, when I went to train with Cesar Gracie, I actually started over. So back in the day, that was kind of like the respectful thing to do. If you got promoted somewhere else and you went to another academy, start over and get promoted, by your new instructor. So.
Did you even tell Cesar that you had a blue belt, or did you just not?
I did. Yeah. He knew I had my blue belt, and he didn't ask me to start over or anything like that. I just, took it off and started wearing a white belt, and he promoted me about maybe a month later. So
okay,
it was good.
I want to talk about Cesar, but we got to back up. You said you submitted everybody with the same choke. I have to know, what was that choke that you did at Gracie Nationals?
It's funny because I was using a lot of triangle chokes and arm bars before then, and this is a choke that actually Jerry had showed me probably 2 or 3 days before the tournament, and it's just a basic like collar choke. I would pass guard, and I don't even know what the choke is called now, but you grab the gi and I put my hand under the arm and hand behind the head. I don't remember any of the choke names, but I did that choke to every single person in the match. And so, all right, I guess this is a pretty good technique for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
So then you ended up training under Cesar, and Cesar is a guy who's not too well known. He doesn't put himself out there much, but I heard him do commentary once on an event. He did an amazing job. He's super knowledgeable. Obviously, a great coach. What was your experience like training under him?
Oh, it was awesome. When I started there with Cesar, there were, I couldn't even tell you the amount of guys, aside from the guys that people know, Dave Terrell, Gil Castillo, Nick Diaz, Jake Shields. Nate Diaz and Gilbert Melendez hadn't even started training at that point. And all of those guys, and then there were probably, 30 or 40 other just monsters that, people don't even know. It was an amazing room just to be able to go into and train. My experience there, I couldn't. It's irreplaceable. There's nowhere else I think I could have trained and got that type of experience. And one of the biggest things with Cesar, which was kind of a really big deal at the time, was Cesar, I think, was the only really high-level jiu-jitsu guy that wasn't 100% about jiu-jitsu. Cesar was, we did sambo, we did wrestling, we did, whatever, boxing, whatever was effective, we did it. And Cesar would bring in guys and say, okay, this guy is really, great at leg locks, like a Val Ignatov. He's gonna, we're gonna work this, So he was really open-minded at the time, which I think, is more acceptable today, but back then it wasn't really popular.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious about what a typical class was, because sometimes people just talk about training with the Gracies like it's a big cohesive system, and it's not. The Gracies are a huge family, and each one of them some of them have a different focus. Was there a self-defense curriculum? What was the warm-up like? What was the structure of the class training under Cesar?
So one of the things training with Cesar that I think is very different is then we trained in the gi or we trained no gi. So we would show up. Cesar would teach technique, and if we had 40 students on the mat, 30 of them would be doing gi, and 10 of them would be doing no gi. And Cesar would show a technique and say, all right, this is how you do this move in the gi, and this is how you adapt it no gi.
So would the student have the choice to wear a gi or not?
Oh, absolutely.
So he wouldn't yell at you like, hey, why didn't you bring your gi
Absolutely, no, not at all. So, most of the MMA guys, the guys that want to do MMA, were training no gi, and the other half of the guys were training in the gi. But the good thing was, whichever one you wanted to do, when you learned a technique, you learned it for gi and you learned it for no gi. So one of the things I think that was very different was we weren't learning techniques that, if you're doing gi, it's going to work, but you're doing no gi, it's not going to work, and vice versa. You were learning techniques that you could use in pretty much any situation. And because a lot of the guys were MMA guys, they weren't really, he didn't really show techniques that weren't going to be effective in MMA or self-defense in the street, stuff like that. So
that makes a lot of
really
sense.
Yeah.
And that's something I've always tried to do in my training, is not to have two different ways of doing something, a gi way and a no gi way, but just try to have one game. Marcelo Garcia talks about that a lot too. Then you don't get confused.
I think it's the best philosophy, absolutely.
But I wonder, can a guy compete at the highest levels in gi competition if he's not good at spider guard and worm guard, these things that require lapels and gi grips? I think they can. I think, to be honest, I do not watch a whole lot of sport jiu-jitsu at all. I'm kind of turned off by it because, I think it's kind of moved away from, in my opinion, what the original foundation was. I see, way more advantages and points, and not just people winning by advantages and points and ref decisions, but that being like the built-in strategy. So I'm kind of turned off by it. I don't watch it much, but I do know guys like Crone who are attackers who don't play, a lot of fancy games, who are very effective in sport jiu-jitsu. Yeah, for sure. I would say he might be an exception, but an amazing exception at that. Absolutely. Yeah. He probably is, Six and Son, so he probably definitely is an exception. But I think that you can be successful with that model. Yeah. And I don't know that he's the exception. He might be the exception because he's one of the few that are actually doing it. Like
everybody wants to learn the fancy techniques. Everybody wants to learn the flashy stuff, which is cool too. I love the flashy stuff. You know, it's not just sport. I think it's entertainment also. If it's going to grow, it has to be entertaining. But you have to have fundamentals. So, another example, maybe it's an exception too, but if you look at like Cesar Gracie, I think he uses a very, fundamental basic game and does very well, against guys that are using more flashy styles too. So, right. I think if you follow that model, I think it can be effective for sure.
Right. You mentioned self-defense, and it's certainly a hot topic, and people have strong opinions, but I think sometimes it gets cloudy when you talk. People don't clarify what they mean by self-defense, and you say you get frustrated watching sport jiu-jitsu because you feel like it's strayed from the roots, which in my mind means you're talking about real fighting, and I know you're an MMA guy, so you practice with strikes, so you got this doing jiu-jitsu with strikes in mind, and then you have this hypothetical street self-defense situation where you're fighting against a guy that doesn't have any experience. Mm-hmm. There's two groups of people that have pretty diverse interests. Where are you in that?
Well, it's difficult to say because I think a lot of that dialogue stems from people having, their own agenda. So the people that are teaching sport jiu-jitsu, they want to promote, sport jiu-jitsu. The guys that are teaching self-defense, they're going to promote self-defense, and it's not necessarily about what's better. I think it's about people's own particular agenda, and getting students or fans or whatnot. But to me, I think it's about what you're in it for. If you're into sport jiu-jitsu because you want to compete and do jiu-jitsu tournaments and you want to do that sort of thing, then I think it's great. You should do that. If you're not interested in self-defense, if you're interested in self-defense, I think you should go to a school that's more suited towards self-defense. But regardless of that, whether you're training MMA or you're doing sport jiu-jitsu or you're doing a self-defense based curriculum, I think it's important to kind of know where you stand. If defending yourself is anywhere on the list of what you're trying to accomplish in training, I think that testing yourself is very important, because I think a lot of people are kind of misinformed about where they stand in their ability to defend themselves. And I think that's separate from MMA. I think a lot of people are misinformed in terms of how effective their game is in MMA also, because one of the number one things is if you're in a situation where you have to defend yourself, the first thing is going to be how confident and mentally capable you are to deal with that situation. Because for me, like, self-defense starts long before physical altercation starts. If people approach you and they want to cause trouble, if they feel your confidence and they know that you don't have any concern about being able to protect yourself and defend yourself, 9 times out of 10 you're not going to have to physically defend yourself. So I think that's number one. But the other thing is, it's like when you go to a tournament or a fight, the stress and nerves a lot of times when people compete, it takes people that are really effective maybe in training and makes them far less effective. A lot of them aren't able to perform. And now multiply that times 10 if you're in a street scenario. Mm-hmm. So I think if you want to be able to defend yourself in a street scenario, I think you do have to take what you're using in your game in sport jiu-jitsu or self-defense MMA, and I think you need to have actual scenarios where you have people, trying to punch you or trying to choke you or trying to do things that people would typically do on the street, and see how what you're doing applies. It's the same for like MMA, because MMA, I think people train, they don't really replicate a MMA scenario effectively, and they go in and they fight, or they have their first fight, and they see that it's not how they thought. So I think number one, particularly for jiu-jitsu guys, if you're gonna if you want to be prepared for an MMA fight, you need to get out there on the mat and train with somebody that doesn't have a shirt on, that's sweaty, that there's no friction, and then get out there and see what takedowns are actually going to be effective, what submissions are actually going to be effective, you know, how do you defend yourself from the bottom? Like, it's not the same, you know. It's not the same as, you know, me fighting somebody in the street and fighting somebody in a cage is very, very different. So a lot of the techniques that you know I would normally use in jiu-jitsu or you know, something like that, they're not going to be as effective in MMA. So you gotta adapt your game. It's like when I get, you know, like I got my hand injury. When I have students that get injured and they say, oh, you know, I got a tournament coming up or I got a fight coming up, but I can't train because I have this injury or that injury. And I ask them, I say, are you going to fight either way if you still have this injury? Oh, absolutely. Well, then you need to train, because you need to know what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. So it's the same thing, you know. You need to know what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. If spider guard's not going to work for you in a, you know, self-defense scenario, you need to know, or you need to know what adaptations you need to make it work. So I think that it's important to know where you're at and to see what you might want to work on.
Yeah. For the past year or so, I've been training a little bit with strikes on the ground. That's something I didn't do before, but it's fascinating how it makes you adapt your game.
It does, absolutely. It makes you, absolutely.
One thing I was curious about is MMA gloves are very small, usually 4-ounce gloves, and you can't train with blasting your training partners in the face. So how can you adequately prepare to deal with that?
When I have guys training, you know, like, you know, for a fight, I usually have guys put on small boxing gloves, so like, you know, 12 or 10-ounce boxing gloves, and Vaseline up, and they're trying to knock you out. So that's how we deal with it. We train with the MMA gloves too, obviously a lot lighter, but yeah, when we're really working like our ground and pound defense and that sort of stuff, we put on small boxing gloves and have at it. That's the easiest way to me to make it work.